Part 87. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 873. It seems difficult to find an exact answer to what is worthwhile and what is not worthwhile. People are accustomed to classify everything into a rational framework. This is the instinctive manifestation of intelligent life seeking advantages and avoiding disadvantages, but after all, it is not a simple machine that only performs the actions represented by a piece of code without any temperature, and carries out the behavioral rules with various conditions set. Of course, Tsubai knew that his biggest gain in the Cinderella story world last time was the inheritance of this ancient vampire, and this time, he summoned it as a disposable consumable just to destroy Luda's clone took back the soul of Jamie May, who had been torn to pieces by himself, and destroyed it with his own hands. Whether the other party understands or not, he has dissipated anyway and will no longer be busy asking him for the answer to the question he just asked. All of this is like the wind and waves on the sea. It is oppressive and calm before it comes, and it is lonely after being released. There is no change, except for the sea water below or the sea water. The sky above the head is still full of clouds and mist, and there is Boss Liang's chair. And that coffee table. The matter was over. Liang Sen completely stood aside and watched. At this time, he seemed to have lost the motivation to continue to hold on. He winked at Xia and disappeared directly on the spot. The chair and the coffee table finally fell into the deep pit below, and the red wine glass that still had a lot left was smashed to pieces, and the red wine as red as blood spilled out. Luda put away the bronze mirror. His clone had just been erased in an instant. This made him still not come back to his senses. It seemed that the rhythm of all this had already changed greatly from what he had expected at the beginning. Split, this is not the result you want to see. Before he was about to leave here by train, he lost a clone. This loss was a bit unbearable for him even as a big shot listener. The scene fell into a brief embarrassment after Liang Sen left. The fat man got up with difficulty. There were no injuries on his body, but he obviously lost too much energy and blood. Before, he used formations to hold Luda down before Luda forcibly broke through. During the formation, he also suffered a huge backlash. Buddha looked much miserable, his body was covered in scars, and one of his arms was even broken, but his life was not in danger. The monk slowly walked out of the ground. His body was covered with dust and he was no longer solemn. However, due to his strength, he did not directly participate in this confrontation, so there were no injuries on his body. At the moment, the monk walked first in front of the fat man. He helped the fat man regulate his energy and blood. As for Buddha, the physical injuries on his body were not actually too serious. The fat man's soul was probably also damaged, so he naturally needed to pay more attention to it. Chen Ryu did not continue to attack because Tsubai destroyed Hai Mai Mei's soul. The cause and effect between Tsubai and Hai Mai Mei was settled. Chen Ryu naturally had no reason to continue fighting. Otherwise, it will be the cause and effect of directly provoking a boss-level audience. Amitabha the monk raised his hand and said the Buddha's name to Luda, who was still floating in the air. Hearing this, Luda's eyes narrowed. Of course he knew what the monk meant. It basically means that you can leave now, and we don't need to retaliate against your wife and children, because we want to achieve the goal has been achieved. If you still want to continue to entangle, we can't do anything to you, but the revenge mentioned before will definitely come true. The rules and principles set by the broadcast strictly control the influence of upper-level forces on lower-level forces from top to bottom. Just like Tsubai and others now, the reason why they are able to fight with this big boss step by step, the reason why the audience did not fall behind in the confrontation and even gained some advantages was because the influence of radio was not weakened much by its sudden problems, and the fear that had accumulated in the hearts of the audience for many years could not be eliminated so easily. But Luda is undoubtedly the biggest loser in this incident. The remaining soul of Jamie May was destroyed. He lost the certificate of surrender that was supposed to be handed over to Li Ji. His clone was destroyed, which directly affected his own strength. He really wanted to kill everyone here one by one in one breath, even if there was Chen Ryu here whose strength made him a little afraid, but Luda was confident that he could defeat everyone here or fight for a long time. Get out alive. But when the soul of Jamie May completely dissipated, the previous cause and effect was wiped out. Luda, who was already in the wrong and suffered part of the cause and effect, really didn't dare to continue causing trouble at this time. Only then did Luda understand why Liang Sen was so eager to leave just now, because if he didn't leave, the task of being the peacemaker and getting everyone down would definitely fall on him. He didn't want to do this hard job, so he just left. After leaving, he didn't care that his villa was destroyed anyway. As for whether the two parties who stayed here could come to Taiwan and continue to fight, it had nothing to do with Liang Sen. Ha! Luda pointed at Subai, who was still half kneeling on the ground in the distance. He had nothing to say and didn't know what to say, but he felt that he had to make a little sound, and then he thought for a long time before he thought of it. One final line, "Don't fall into my hands." After finishing speaking, Luda's figure turned into a bolt of thunder and disappeared. Bah! The fat man spat out a mouthful of blood and shouted dissatisfied, "I have to show off after leaving. Don't you also wait for others to leave before you dare to make fun of them?" The monk glanced at the fat man helplessly, then stood up and walked to the Buddha. "I'm fine." Buddha said that he didn't need the monk's treatment. He himself was proficient in medical science and was very clear about his condition. "Shall we go back?" The fat man looked at Subai, and then at Chen Ryu, "or, go out for a drink or a restaurant, fat master, I'll treat you, just think of it as a welcome to Dabai. Congratulations on Dabai's departure. Prison. Beauties, let's go together." Chen Ryu didn't answer, but it was impossible for her to leave because the deal between her and Subai hadn't been completed yet. Everyone got into Fatty's Audi A6 again, but this time the driver was replaced by an uninjured monk. Chen Ryu was still sitting in the passenger seat, while Subai, Fatty, and Foye sat in the back. "I sat like this when I came here, but at that time the fat man was driving in the front. Now that the fat man is sitting in the back, the seat in the back is obviously much more crowded." The fat man seemed very excited. He first connected the car's Bluetooth with his own hand, and then began to look for songs on his own. Soon, the familiar melody of Sailor began to play in the car stereo, but Fatty quickly turned off the music again. He felt that the song did not match the current atmosphere. After thinking for a while, Fatty chose to play another song. "The lost time is scattered in the wind. It's as if I can't remember to face it again. Wandering days. You are accompanying. Reunion by fate. The voice of innocence is fading." This song is Friendship Years by Ekin Chen, which is the theme song in the movie Young and Dangerous. Obviously, Fatty felt that everyone got together to take revenge and kill someone this time, although he didn't get the message he hoped for. But the person was always hacked to death, quite like a local gangster returning home after a fight. However, the fat man thought that this song would resonate with other people in the car, but he sang it selflessly for a while and found that Subai was leaning against the car window with his eyes closed, while Buddha was looking at the back of the chair in front of him, lost in thoughts about Buddhist philosophy. Thoughtful, the monk concentrated on driving the car and turned on the floodlights from time to time, while Chen Ryu had the cold look at the beginning. This made the fat man look a little embarrassed. He, a social butterfly in the audience circle, actually stood aside at this moment. Soon, the monk pulled over and parked. There was a Sichuan restaurant in front of him. Everyone got out of the car together. After sitting down at the dining table, Subai took the initiative to pick up the menu and ordered some dishes and asked the waiter to write down a few dishes that he should pay attention to. The taste and the way it's made. After the waiter left, Subai looked at everyone present, was stunned for a moment, and asked, "Why don't you say anything?" "Well, let me say it first. This time, I would like to thank you brothers. In addition, I have learned about many tombstones in the place of enlightenment. Some inheritance and insights may be what you need. I'll see if I can reproduce some of them for you then, so you can all watch them together. Although it sometimes seems too tacky to say we share blessings and share adversities, settling accounts between brothers is also a wise motto in dealing with interpersonal relationships that has been passed down from ancient times. Although people help you not to obtain any benefits or rewards, but as the recipient of assistance, Subai cannot always accept this kind of help calmly. Whether he is a fat man, a Buddha, or a monk, they are all wonderful people. At the beginning, everyone got to know each other by scheming and digging holes in each other. In fact, the nature of this relationship has not changed, just because we have experienced a lot of things together. The reason is that this mutual use relationship is coated with a layer of attractive beeswax, but you can't keep licking it greedily, because underneath the beeswax is actually a needle-like thorn. The meal was quite normal. The atmosphere was not too lively, but not too cold either. Chen Ru also moved her chopsticks frequently. It seemed that she had a good appetite after having just had a fight. At this time, the monk's cell phone rang. He answered the phone and handed it to Subai. Subai answered the phone, and a knowing voice came from the other side. Subai's cell phone was electrocuted into a piece of scrap metal when facing Luda's clone, so Xiezhen can only contact Subai through the people around him. The train tickets are here, Xiezhen said. So fast. Haha, Subai said nonchalantly, then is your boss planning to come to settle a score with me now? The problem is, the other big guys have received it, but he hasn't. Subai. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 874. Liang Sen naturally has more than one residence in Shanghai. He and the two of them run an online game company. They do not need to rely on their own abilities to make money deliberately in violation of cause and effect. Their wealth makes it impossible for them to be on the richest list, but you say it is not a problem to leisurely live the comfortable life you need in the real world. This is a bit like Subai back then, except that Subai's previous wealth was left by the couple, while Liang Sen and Xiezhen earned it through their own abilities like ordinary people. Sometimes, Xiezhen also wonders in his mind, what would have happened if he and his boss had not become the audience. Based on the character of his boss, he should be mainly an otaku. He may not go out to socialize except when going to the company. Just stay in your own virtual world, this way, that side of his personality won't be so obvious. But there are no ifs and what ifs in life. The current situation is that my boss became an audience much earlier than me, and then lived step by step until now. He has been avoiding and shrinking, but maybe it is because of his strong bones. Perhaps due to his desire to survive, he has never fallen and has been living firmly. In the audience circle, the length of time you live after becoming an audience is directly proportional to your strength. In the past, even Jizhen, his subordinate, couldn't stand his boss. At that time, it might have been a hate out of love model. The boss was his idol and the target he pursued, but as he walked higher and higher and saw the target in front of him more and more clearly, the fullness of dreams and the skinny texture of reality formed a sharp collision. Then, Xiezhen chose to go to the villa with Fatty and others to unlock the seal of the boss's clone, forcing the boss to take that step and have to go to the testimony. Afterwards, Liang Sen did not punish Xiezhen for this, and even scolded him. Perhaps Liang Sen himself knew that there were some things that really couldn't be avoided. After going through that period of confusion and struggle, Xiezhen seemed to have a little more understanding of his boss. This is the kind of person he is, and he likes to live in this way. This is his ways and rules of survival. He likes to be used again and again by the woman he has unrequited love for. He is used to protecting himself wisely in emergencies. He is keen that the first thought in his mind at any time is to move himself to a safe position. If he didn't have the identity of an audience, his boss would now be an it man who is very nerdy and unsociable in the eyes of ordinary people. Fate has made a choice for him that he doesn't like. He uses this way to fight and express himself. His own attitude is understandable. Of course, for Jizhen, you have to see it whether you are used to it or not. Taking a step back, your boss is very close to getting on the train to go to that place. In fact, it seems that he single-handedly pushed his boss into the pit of fire. Part of the reason why he understood it was actually from the guilt deep in his heart. Orange juice, with ice. Liang Sen took off his pajamas and entered the bathroom to take a shower first. He had been sitting by the swimming pool of the villa in his pajamas, reading the newspaper, drinking red wine and basking in the sun. Now, all I can do is take a shower and start over. For Liang Sen, he only has a few days left in the real world. Even if he is notified in the next second that the ticket has arrived, please sign for it, Liang Sen will not be surprised at all, so he values this limited life more. Your quality of life over time. Here, Xie Zhen had just squeezed orange juice and mixed 2 cocktails. Over there, Liang Sen had taken a shower and put on a new set of pajamas and walked out. His boss seemed to always prefer red pajamas with gold rims. Each residence is equipped with many sets. Liang Sen took the orange juice and took a sip, then put it down, picked up the cocktail, and sat down on the wicker chair on the balcony. The sunshine seemed a bit too strong at this time, but it did not stop Liang Sen from continuing to read the newspaper. However, the newspaper changed from the legal daily in the villa to the Yangtze Evening News. Xie Zhen knew that what his boss enjoyed was not reading newspapers, but the inexplicable enjoyment that reading newspapers brought him. Why don't you go to Subai and ask about the ticket? Ji Zhen stood nearby and seemed to deliberately not open any pot. Liang Sen was leaving, and it would be almost impossible to find opportunities to be sarcastic in the future, so recently the relationship between the two began to slowly change. Xie Zhen began to become more and more unrestrained while Liang Sen became more and more generous. The two grown men are not really in a gay relationship, but they are close friends who live and work together. They are not used to and don't like to be sentimental when parting. They just choose a method that is mutually acceptable to them. Wait for the moment of separation to come. Am I that naive in your eyes? Liang Sen smiled slightly, not caring about the sarcasm in his words. Is it true? Xie Zhen asked back. According to the information we have, although this possibility is ridiculously low, strictly speaking, the man and woman should be in a position that none of us could have expected. It's so high, so Subai's words can't be completely false, right? Okay, stop talking nonsense. The reason why I just stood by and did nothing was just for your sake. Our generation will leave soon. That little detective really opened my eyes this time. Was able to fight Luta for a few times without falling down. What he lacks now is nothing more than time. As long as he is given enough time, he can digest the wealth and inheritance he carries. Then among your generation, I'm afraid there aren't many people who can really compare to him. Moreover, this little detective is also known for his sharp-edged personality. This time, I am trying to save you some favors. As for the ticket, I had never thought about it at all, and I couldn't really be stupid enough to believe something that even a 3-year-old child couldn't believe. Xie Zhen shook the wine glass in front of him. He didn't know whether what his boss said was completely true, but his tone seemed very sincere. Although he didn't dare to say that he chose to sit on the sidelines entirely for himself, his reasons should be it's also within his scope of consideration. However, what makes Xie Zhen most happy is that the boss did not choose to side with the woman this time. Xie Zhen's thoughts are a bit like competing for the favor of a man and another woman. Although in the past, his boss was frighteningly stubborn when faced with his unrequited love. He even slapped himself for saying something about that woman. A slap, but this time, he didn't choose to help the woman. In Xie Zhen's view, this was already a great improvement for Liang Sen. Suddenly, Liang Sen suddenly put down the newspaper in his hand and said with some dissatisfaction. Luda, you are really haunting. I have already destroyed one of my villas because of you, and now you want to continue to destroy the second one. Luda's figure appeared in front of the balcony. What was erased was only his clone, so his original body still looked like he had a kind of floating aura. He didn't look so embarrassed, but the melancholy between his brows was still there. Very clear. Xie Zhen didn't go to pour red wine for Luda this time. He came as a guest and came again and again, which made people dislike him. Haha, Luda just sneered at Liang Sen. If there are no broadcasting rules, If there were no broadcasting rules, you would have been strangled to death by the strong ones when you were weak. Liang Sen attacked mercilessly. Okay, I admit defeat this time, but Liang Sen, I'm very curious about something, so I want to come over and ask you before leaving Shanghai. You should have got some information about that place. I don't know. I know what your plan is. In that place, if you don't have a team, no power, and no support, you will die very quickly. Liang Sen was silent. He knew some things, but many times if you want to find a group or a relationship, you have to pay for something like a letter of surrender, similar to the relationship between the little detective and the two monks and the fat man. In the relationship between the group must at least give to each other and go through hardships before this relationship can be said to be somewhat solid. But asking Boss Liang to risk his life for the sake of friendship for others is a bit too embarrassing. It is really difficult for people with his personality to find real friends, and no group has much interest in thinking about it. To recruit him, after all, no group would be so stupid as to recruit a guy who would be the first to give in when trouble comes. I will make it clear to Li Ji about this matter, but I will also make it clear to them about your matter. Luda's mentality is purely because he is unlucky and wants to drag others into the water. I have to say, the injustice he suffered today was indeed great enough. You. Liang Sen stretched out his hand and pointed at Luda angrily. After all, although he was watching the fire from the other side, Hai Mei planned to hand it over to Luda from the beginning. It was Luda who wanted to pretend and force him to teach him a lesson. The younger generation deliberately delayed her from leaving. But at this moment, Luda felt a sudden pain in his chest. The pain was fleeting, even shorter than when he received the mission notification before. Then, Luda was shocked to find a blue paper ticket coming from his own body. The chest position slowly emerged, from virtual to solid, and finally was pinched in his hand. This is the ticket. Luda closed his eyes and took a deep breath. What should come will always come. The ticket was finally issued. However, when Luda opened his eyes, he saw that Liang Sen was still pointing at him, and there was no trace of the ticket in front of Liang Sen. How is this going? Liang Sen, you. Luda obviously noticed something strange. Why did I arrive with a ticket, but you didn't? Everyone must have this thing together, but there is no such thing as free shipping in Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Shanghai. Liang Sen's hand still maintained the motion of pointing at Luda. He swallowed, as if he wanted to forcefully calm down the ecstasy that was raging in his heart. He wanted to say something, but found that he was too happy and excited. It is difficult to make a steady sound at this time. What that guy said is true, what he said is true. You have known it for a long time, you have been sure for a long time, right? Luda shouted at Liang Sen almost furiously. You deliberately didn't tell me, you tricked me on purpose. Liang Sen was so excited that he couldn't speak, but he still pretended to be calm and gave Luda a look. That is. I have already seen through everything. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 875. The fat man was launching an attack on a big pig's trotter. His taste has always been heavy, especially for women, and especially for food. It's so oily, spicy, and fat. According to the fat man, this was what his grandfather did when he was a child. Emphasis on education. Fatty is about the same age as Subai. In fact, children born around the 1990s rarely experience starvation. Generally, as long as there are no unexpected changes in the family, snacks may be considered a rarity. Yes, but you can still determine how much you can eat. Furthermore, Fatty, his grandfather and his father are both busy men who are busy doing nothing. They are well-known figures from all over the country, and even some people in Chengdu ask them to come over to do errands. Naturally, they are easy to take red envelopes, and it is a frivolous thing. Not only did the children eat with their mouths full of oil, but they also brought back a lot of food. Therefore, the fat man's family conditions were okay when he was a child. At the same time, other children would be very excited when they heard that they were going to eat at the banquet, but the fat man could eat a meal in about 2 or 3 days. Banquet. But Fatty's grandpa seems to be focused on cultivating fat people. When he was a child, he would be rewarded 2 yuan of pocket money for a piece of fat meat, and 5 yuan for an extra bowl of rice. The fat man said that he was not fat when he was a child, but he was slowly raised to be fat by his grandfather's coercion and inducement. When the monk heard about this, he just smiled and said that your grandpa also did it for your own good. The fat man was just a little puzzled and said, "It's a pity that my grandfather has been dead for several years, and I don't have the chance to ask him to set up the Longmen formation again. At first, I just thought that my family just relied on this craft to cheat food and drink, but I didn't expect that the old man would still do it. There are really 2 brushes." Because after becoming a listener, the fat man naturally saw things from a different perspective after his cultivation level improved. He once calculated his birth date and speculated on his fate before becoming a listener. He actually had a false destiny. Virtual means poor luck and easy to do evil. From ancient times to thousands of years before liberation, you might be able to be a king of the mountain, but in this era, you either have to go to jail or eat a pill. Peanuts. But although the fat man is partial to pornography, gambling, and drugs, he has never been a chicken head, nor opened a gambling house, nor has he sold drugs. Before he became an audience, his life had been ups and downs, but it was always smooth sailing, and he and the public were not. There was no overlap. Later, Fatty himself deduced that his destiny seemed to have been slowly deflected since he was a child. Still eating, Buddha watched from the side as the fat man had already chewed 6 pig's trotters. He stretched out his hand helplessly to signal the waiter to add another braised pig's trotters. However, Buddha felt that having a fat man sitting next to him during the meal could increase the number of people. Guy's appetite. Fat master, I can live smoothly until now because of this mouthful. The fat man continued chewing on his own. That's true, the monk smiled beside him. He doesn't eat food in critical situations, but usually he only eats vegetarian food if conditions permit. Your grandpa is also a worldly expert. Compared to you, it's far behind. My grandfather and my father's generation relied on their words to fool people into making a living. My grandfather was often criticized during the riots in the past. Even now, he is a bad person. There is no way to make a living on the table without being a monk, and you are so glamorous. The fat man took a sip of cold beer, but when I think about it, when the Japanese invaded Nanjing, my grandfather crawled out of the pile of dead people and fled to Sichuan when he was a child. There were ups and downs in his life. I've had a lot of experience, and I might have some unique methods, but it's a pity that I didn't pass them on to me. His Tao is useless, and it's useless to teach it to you. The monk shook his head slightly. This kind of thing needs to be understood through life experience, and experience, coupled with unique magic techniques. You don't have the state of mind, let alone the time. Even if the audience in Japan and South Korea respects their lineage and enhancement more, they cannot waste time like this. unless they are all saints and are only immersed in the atmosphere of enlightenment without caring about their own life or death. How did your grandfather die, Chen Ryu? A woman at the dinner table asked abruptly. The fat man didn't have any taboos and said directly, I'm an old man. My father does all the work for me. But one day I suddenly wanted to eat something like that. It was green. Anyway, it was what the old man ate when he was a child in Jiangsu and Zhejiang. He made something that was similar to glutinous rice dumplings. He asked my mother to make it for him. My mother made it and steamed it. The old man ate 3 of them in a row. He choked and couldn't catch his breath, so he just kicked off and walked away. Now, Fatty, I did the first chore for him when I started my apprenticeship. My dad was a filial son and only responsible for crying. Now that I think about it, it can be regarded as a kind of inheritance. Death Chen Ryu said these 2 words again coldly. Hey, what do you mean, you bitch? Don't think that because you can beat Fatty, I'm afraid of you. Fatty continued without waiting for Chen Ryu's reaction, speak with some virtue. Chen Ryu smiled to herself and continued eating. The monk caught an unusual flavor from Chen Ryu's question. He died violently and helped the fat man change his life. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed that it was interesting, and his grandson also became an audience. But it's a pity that the fat man's grandfather has passed away a long time ago. Unlike the parents of the person in front of him, they have been struggling for 20 years and it seems that they are not over yet. Moreover, their attitude towards future generations is completely different. The monk took a sip of herbal tea and thought to himself. He had no intention of telling the fat man this guess, because there was really no need to make this extraneous matter. Death is like a lamp going out. The same is true for ordinary people, and so is the audience. Now go investigate and pursue the fat man. Grandpa's true identity means nothing anymore. Moreover, the monk himself also knew that Fatty was a person who looked rough but was actually very careful. There was something behind Chen Ryu's words, but the monk didn't believe that Fatty didn't hear it. At this moment, Subai put down his phone, poured himself a glass of wine, took a sip, and said, "The train tickets have been issued over the radio." Everyone present was slightly stunned. The sentence "broadcasting has issued train tickets" contains several meanings. The first is that broadcasting has resumed operation and has begun to continue to operate its own rules. The previous problems should have been resolved. The other level is that this group of big-name listeners are about to get on the train and leave this world. As soon as they leave, the mountains that were originally pressing on their heads in this real world will be moved away, and this group of high-level people such as myself the audience will become the top group of people in the pyramid today. Of course, there is another meaning, that is, Boss Liang, who has been completely given up hope, will probably come to take revenge. Hee, I guess Boss Liang is very angry right now. A big boss-level audience, after being cheered by Dabai and I together, turned out to be completely incredulous and on the sidelines. Damn it, a big boss-level audience is nothing more than that. No different from the old rural ladies that Fatty fooled before. He is a special case, Chen Ryu reminded. His reputation has long been known among the big-shot audience circles. Of course the fame Chen Ryu mentioned was not prestige. Then we can leave here early, or go back to Lao Fang's house or other places, otherwise it will be really difficult to deal with him if he comes to cause trouble, Foye suggested, although we are not afraid, nor are we worried that he will really. You can do something out of anger, but it is best if you can be quiet. If a big-shot listener really wants to have a hard time with you and wants to bend his body to cause trouble for you, you will really be annoyed. Since the train tickets have been issued, the train is expected to leave in the next few days. We didn't know Xiaoxuan's whereabouts from Haimai, but since Haimai is helping Lizzie, then Lizzie must know Xiaoxuan's current situation. Let's go to the train station together and try our luck that day. The monk said try your luck, because everyone knows that Lychee and Haimai are not creatures of the same dimension. He and others can hang Jaime up and torture him, but if he does this to Lichi, who may be hanged in the end? It's really hard to say. Ha! After saying the first sentence, Subai paused for a long time, as if he was digesting the information just given to him. At this time, he finally said the following sentence: everyone else has it, but Liang Sen didn't receive the train ticket. Crack! The fat man's chopsticks fell directly to the ground, and he stared at Subai as if he had seen a ghost. The monk and the Buddha were also startled. Even Chen Ryu, who had always been calm, subconsciously looked at Subai at this time, with a meaningful feeling in his eyes. What Subai said to Liang Sen at the beginning immediately came to everyone's mind: a quota that would allow them not to get on the train. Is it a coincidence? Buddha said, but obviously everyone could hear that he meant something else. If it's a coincidence, it would be too much of a coincidence, Chen Ryu said. Amitabha the monk clasped his hands together and recited the Buddha's name, because he had nothing to say now, and it could be seen that Subai was also a little speechless now, and from Subai's point of view, he would not let this happen while ecstatic. On the contrary, the monk believed that Subai must be in a state of anger and fear inside now. Because for Subai, he would rather believe that Asao can climb a tree than believe that his parents love him. Moreover, Subai has said before that it is basically impossible for a man and a woman to have any influence on the broadcast. Even taking a step back, if this incident is not a coincidence, it probably means that the man and woman have not let him go, and seem to intend to exert their own influence on his destiny and life trajectory. This has almost become Subai's N-Island. The reason why Subai summoned the precious ancient vampire inheritance as a disposable consumable before was precisely because he did not allow his life to be manipulated in this way again. At this moment, the fat man sitting next to Subai suddenly stood up, grabbed Subai's arm with both hands, and knelt down. He didn't care about the reactions of other diners around him, and shouted directly with a cry. "Prince, do you still know me? I am your loyal fat man." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 876. This meal ends here. Eat to live, but live not to eat is the motto of many people, but for a few people present, eating is more of just it can be regarded as a kind of life experience. After all, Subai stayed in the place of enlightenment for half a year without eating a grain of rice and was still alive and well. When we went back, the atmosphere in the car was much duller than when we came out of Jizhen Villa. The monk was still driving the car, and even the usually active fat man rarely became quiet at this time. The words prince and loyal fatty that Fatty just said to him were more like a kind of ridicule, not only to him, but also to Subai himself. And now, no one has fully recovered from the fact that Liang Sen did not receive the train ticket. There are many possibilities and even a huge mystery in it. When these big guys leave on the train, finally, they themselves will be the top group of people in the pyramid, which also means that they will be closest to broadcasting, so it is necessary to not let go of the slightest research on the changes in broadcasting at this time. Subai closed his eyes slightly, and his eyes drifted out of the car window in confusion. He did not believe that this matter would have a direct relationship with him. No matter whether the man or woman could influence the broadcast, they would not really do what he had deceived before. As he said when he was explaining the matter, he was very practical and knew etiquette, and he suddenly showed such care to his only heir. What Subai is more worried about is actually that if he is really involved in something, does it mean that his chess piece still has residual value for them even now? This is the most unacceptable possibility for Subai. After knowing that he had paid so much and suffered for so long, and finally separated step by step from the web woven by the man and the woman, Subai didn't want there to be a web outside. "Dabai, are you familiar with this place?" The monk pointed to the building on the left. Subai looked over and saw that it was indeed familiar. His detective agency had been opened there. It had been almost 2 years, but his detective agency had long since become Yingying Earth's Diagnosis and Treatment Center. There are not many people who can sit down and chat and drink comfortably in the real world. Leaving aside those sitting in the car, it seems that Ying should be very high in the queue. This woman can never catch a man's G-point so that you feel comfortable and natural when getting along with her. Let me go down and take a look, Subai said. Hey, the fat man showed an I understand you expression. Chen Ryu frowned slightly, obviously dissatisfied with Subai's way of wasting time, but she also knew that Subai was injured now, so it was really too embarrassing for him to spend all his energy copying out the tombstone right now. Go up and have a cup of coffee. There is a cafe on the first floor. The monk glanced at the fat man and reminded, it doesn't seem like a wise choice to go back to Lao Fang's house now. Liang Sen didn't receive the train ticket. It's difficult to completely resolve this matter. Keep it a secret. The poor monk feels that there may be eyes staring at Lao Fang's house now. Liang Sen did not receive the train ticket, and it happened not long after Subai made the threat. In addition, the influence that the man and the woman had just made a few days ago, if the big guys who were about to get on the train knew about this, things will definitely come swarming like sharks smelling blood, but we must not think that these big guys are all like Liang Senator. Otherwise, there will be some big guys who want to hijack the emperor to control the princes. They are all people who have to take the train to the garbage dump. If they are really single, what else can't be put away? After all, the two people I met before, Liang Sen and Luda, actually do not conform to the general atmosphere of the big shot audience circle. Liang Sen is a weirdo, and Luda is also a little timid in doing things, but they look like this. It doesn't mean that other big guys are like this. There should be a lot of people with a mentality similar to that of lychees. Besides, the behavior of the man and the woman a few days ago was like a shot in the arm for those people. But they didn't know what kind of helper Su Yuhang had. Due to the limitation of information clues, they could only think that Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu had spent 20 years grinding their swords and finally succeeded. After all, how bold a person is, how productive he is, the idea that man can conquer nature is actually a common consciousness among intelligent life, and is more applicable to listeners who have transcended the category of ordinary humans. Subai never thought that he would suddenly want to see Ying, but in the end he would ask a car of people to follow him. The monk drove the car directly into the underground parking lot, and then he and the fat man began to set up an array. Chen Ryu also stayed. After all, she also knew that although the monk was talking to the fat man before, he was actually referring to her. After all, there is no problem in fooling people of the same level with the monk and the fat man's cultivation and formation attainments, but it's not enough to avoid detection from a big-name audience. Subai and Foye were too embarrassed to go up to drink coffee first, so they stayed with them below. About half an hour later, Chen Ryu and the others completed the arrangement of the formation. When the monk and the fat man came over, they both looked thoughtful. It was obvious that these two big yin BS had definitely stolen a lot of lessons just now, but Chen Ryu didn't care much about it. The only thing that could concern her now was when she would be able to achieve a breakthrough in enlightenment. 5 people entered the elevator together from the underground parking lot. With this formation set up, can we really avoid the boss's detection? Subai still couldn't believe it, although he did admire Chen Ryu's formation attainments. The train is about to leave, probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. In this case, the entire pattern of Shanghai will undergo great changes and distortions. My magic circle only blocks the boss's detection of aura. If you are good at it, the big bosses in the deduction have no role in this formation, but they probably don't dare to do it in Shanghai, because it is very likely to involve themselves. Hearing this, Subai suddenly thought that when the train was about to leave last time, Liang Sen, who had not yet attained enlightenment, simply ran to Dandong in one breath. This might have something to do with it. Subai did not go to Ying first, but came to the coffee shop with everyone. Everyone ordered a cup of coffee and some snacks and fruit plates. Everyone sat by the window, not in the mood to drink coffee at all. The agony of spending time as a foreigner. Give me 2 days to rest, and then I will copy the tombstone for you right away. Subai took a sip of coffee and immediately assured Chen Ryu that this woman had indeed helped him a lot. She had just brought the monk and the fat man to decorate it. Formation, Subai was too embarrassed to neglect her. Chen Ryu nodded and said nothing. At this moment, 2 more people came out of the elevator entrance and walked into the cafe. This building is considered a multifunctional building. Xiezhen and Liangsen's companies occupy 2 floors here, which are also occupied by hotels, saunas, and clubs. Most of the customers who come here to drink coffee are actually in this building. People who go to work. Hey, Fatty winked at Fatty at this moment. Subai followed his gaze and found that a man and a woman had just come in. The man was wearing a black sweatshirt and a pair of sneakers. He was very sporty, but he was not a young man. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Even though he is wearing sportswear, he still looks very calm, giving people the feeling of an uncle like Chen Daoming. The woman is around 27 or 80 years old. She wears exquisite red high-heeled shoes and black stockings covering her slender legs. Her delicate and slightly charming facial features seem to interpret the meaning of beautiful thing in her every gesture. This woman was Ying-Ying. Subai didn't know who the person beside her was, but the two seemed to have a good relationship. They were sitting at a table together, waiting for coffee and chatting. The man was very humorous and funny, making Ying-Ying laugh from time to time, and it could be seen that Ying-Ying didn't have a perfunctory work-like smile. The monk and the Buddha are both monks, so it is not convenient for them to express their opinions on this kind of matter. Chen Ryu is a woman and seems to be too lazy to care about this kind of thing. But the fat man is very keen on this. He knows that Dabai doesn't seem to have any feelings for women. Oh, no, it's that damn obsessive-compulsive disorder, but Bimax seems to feel differently about this woman. I'm telling you, Dabai, be considerate, you've been missing for half a year, people need to live a normal life, right? The fat man held Subai's hand meaningfully. If you want to live a decent life, you must have a little green on your head. Of course I chose to forgive her. She and I are not in the relationship you imagined. Subai shook his head and said. Didn't you have sex? Fatty asked. Subai shook his head. Yeah, it's boring. The fat man felt a little disappointed. Then what are you going to do? Let's go directly to the hotel on the 12th floor and get a room first. After these big guys leave by fire, we can come out swaggering. Yes, Subai nodded. Everyone stood up one after another. With Fatty's formation, Ying-Ying and others over there couldn't see what was going on here. The 5 people entered the elevator again. Subai took out a cigarette and handed one to Fatty. Fat master, I will go into the room later, take a shower and then go to sleep. Dabai, what do you want to do? Kill the man when he leaves. Subai suddenly said this. Damn, don't you have nothing to do with her? But if she is with that man, it will make me feel a little uncomfortable when I go to see her. Anyway, if you kill an ordinary person, you will turn a blind eye. Subai replied nonchalantly. He is really a selfish man. He doesn't want to make promises or take responsibility, but he wants women to only serve him. Chen Ryu said sarcastically. Ha 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 ha. The fat man put his hand on Subai's shoulder. Mom, I thought you were getting sick in that ancient tomb after not seeing you for half a year. Well, I'm relieved now, fat man, you're still the same. Dabai, that's what it tastes like. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 877. Opening the door and sitting down on the boss's chair behind her desk, Ying-Ying took off her high heels, leaned her feet on the table, and at the same time gently unbuttoned a few clothes. With the same movement, different people will have different feelings when doing it. Just like a handsome guy flicking his bangs at a girl and a loser flicking her bangs at a girl will get completely different feedback. What Ying-Ying showed at this time is a kind of lazy charm. She is like a Persian cat, and her every move can arouse the nerves of men. In layman's terms, she has the ability to quickly engorge a man's lower body with blood. A smart woman naturally knows how to use her own advantages, and her body is also an advantage. However, this kind of life and this kind of work are also extremely tiring for her. Fortunately, she has basically completed several of her papers, and some work records have been systematically summarized and organized. Next at this stage, she plans to temporarily close her studio and go to the United States to continue studying psychology. It is difficult for society to be completely equal, and this is especially true for women in the workplace. Furthermore, Ying Ying's job is, at best, a psychotherapist, but at worst, it is a stronghold of the S, M, and M clubs. She wants to stay in the river all the time. Walking without getting your shoes wet is the most torturous thing. She reached out, picked up the teacup on the table, and took a sip of water, which temporarily dispelled the bitterness of coffee that still remained in her lips and teeth. She stretched gently and relaxed herself. Today's work was over. She stood up without putting on her shoes, leaving her silk stockings and feet on the carpet. She was going to take a shower and enjoy her own night. In fact, she herself knew that in the eyes of many people, what she was doing was similar to in a business similar to the leather meat shop in ancient times. Even some of her customers occasionally showed a strong primitive possessiveness in their eyes. No one believed that she was still pure and innocent, but fortunately in today's society, she was pure and pure. It is no longer so precious. Ying Ying bent down and was about to take off her stockings, but at this moment, her movements suddenly stopped. On her sofa, there was actually a person sitting, and that person happened to be leaning there leisurely, looking at her. He roamed freely in his own body. Long time no see. Ying Ying was not angry, she just sighed. The man sitting on the sofa in front of her at some time, she hadn't seen him for a long time, he suddenly appeared like a gust of wind. And then disappeared suddenly. Every time he came, I was unprepared, and every time he left, I was equally unprepared. This is like a chasing game. I once found it very interesting and exciting, and I was even willing to take the initiative to give myself out in order to give these encounters and contacts a memorable color, but the other party seemed to be there every time. At this time, retreat and avoid. Ying Ying was very confident in her figure and appearance. She once thought that the other party felt that she was a bit dirty as a woman in this industry, because Ying Ying could see that the other party had a disdain for money and material things. Gu's attitude, and at the same time, the aristocratic temperament on the other person also told her that he had a good family background. A man like this is indeed qualified and has the capital to pick and choose the women he sleeps with. But later, slowly, Ying Ying found that it was not what she had imagined. A smile appeared at the corner of Ying Ying's mouth. He was sick. This smile made Subai, who was sitting on the sofa, feel uncomfortable. Suddenly, he felt a thorn in his back. Young Master Su could even guess at the first moment what this woman was thinking about. For most men, it is absolutely intolerable to be ridiculed by a woman for their shortcomings. However, this woman understands him very well. She is like a tree hole for myself, where I can talk, but I can't bear to destroy her, or in other words, I can't bear to let her color fade from my side. Fatty once said that in the eyes of men, there are two types of women, those who have slept with you and those who have not slept with you. This is a silly statement, but I don't know why, but it fits the feeling in front of me and fits the current relationship between the two of them. If in the past, Subai kept a distance from Ying Ying because he had a lot of worries and his own uncontrollable situation, but now, Subai, who has shed most of his burdens, has begun to deal with this relationship. I cherish the beauty created by distance. It seems difficult for an ordinary person, a beautiful woman with whom he can communicate and chat, to find another one, and he has no intention of creating a new tree hole for communication. It was a very selfish idea, and Subai's behavior was even worse than that of some scumbags who supported a third party. They had at least made vague promises, but he didn't even bother to give them, and just wanted to monopolize this beauty. Unknowingly, Subai's state of mind when facing Ying at this time, it was like stripping himself down to the level of an emperor facing ordinary subjects, and even much higher than this. He felt that he was a god, and Ying you should be controlled by yourself, even if you are locked in a cage by yourself and used as your own chicken soup at your call. Subai closed his eyes suddenly, leaned his head on the sofa, and clenched his hands subconsciously. He suddenly felt that a huge black hole appeared in front of him, and he was walking into it step by step. Because just now, he suddenly felt that the way he looked at Ying was very similar to the way Su Yuhang looked at him. The feeling that he could control the person in front of him was so addictive. It was more powerful than the power of life and death. Advanced, and more intoxicating. This is the power that belongs to God and is the exclusive preserve of the Creator. A smooth feeling comes, followed by a warm fragrance, not greasy, with a hint of mint. We haven't seen each other for half a year. When you see me, it's like seeing a ghost. Ying's fingers gently pressed on Subai's lips, and she leaned against Subai's body. Subai shook his head, thought for a while, and said, "How are you doing recently? Why do you feel like you are asking me if I have enough money recently?" Ying slightly distanced herself from Subai, then got up from the sofa. "Have you seen my desk?" "No," Subai replied. "I'm going to the United States for further study. I may come back in a few years, but I may not come back. I'm also planning to close the studio. By the way, thank you for the rent." Ying put a hand on a document on the desk. She took out a cigarette with her other hand, bit it between her lips, lit it, and took a puff. The light smoke exhaled from her charming lips, bringing a different kind of temptation. Yiren was smoking and looking at Subai, as if waiting for Subai's response. "Oh, that's how it is." But Subai's response was still so simple. Ying smiled slightly, walked to Subai, took the cigarette out of her mouth and handed it to Subai. Subai took the cigarette and took a puff. It smelled of mint, and I understand where the mint smell from Ying when she leaned against him came from. She was not disappointed with his response. This seemed to be the response he should make. This man had unimaginable restraint, but she knew better that there were terrible and violent things hidden in his body. Subai didn't say why he came, and Ying didn't ask. This place was like an inn, and she was more like a masseur. When Subai needed it, he would come over. She would massage him, and then he would leave. "Wait a moment. I came here every time when I needed it, without making an appointment or saying goodbye. It was very sudden every time." "What about you, how are you doing recently?" Ying asked. "Good." There was no nutritious conversation, and the atmosphere in the air was also slightly embarrassing. Half a year was nothing to Subai. He was suppressed in the place of enlightenment but experienced many things in succession, so he didn't feel that time passed so slowly. But for Ying for a woman, for an ordinary person, half a year is enough time for her to think, enough time for her to calm down, and enough time for her to make a choice. "Then I won't disturb you anymore." Subai stood up and prepared to say goodbye. Ying stood on one side, preparing to say goodbye. This time, she didn't tease him, and he didn't show a gesture of wanting to possess but restraining himself. Compared with when they met before, the spark and passion between the two people seemed to have faded away. "Walk out the door, close the door." Subai leaned against the wall beside the door, holding an unburned cigarette in his mouth, while on the other side of the wall, Ying did the same thing. However, at this moment, Subai saw a man in black sportswear walking out of the elevator. The guy looked like Chen Daoming. He was holding a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. "She is the woman I like," Chen Daoming said directly to Subai, speaking very seriously. "I don't care what relationship you had with her in the past, but please don't bother her again in the future." Subai frowned slightly. He came here directly after coming down from the hotel floor. He did not kill this guy impatiently as he had done when he was teasing the fat man before. In the eyes of Chen Daoming, Subai had a look of disdain. Obviously, this man did not listen to his warning, which made Chen Daoming feel a little uncomfortable. Then, he smiled and walked slowly towards Subai. Said slowly. You know, there are some people in this world that you absolutely cannot afford to offend. She is a fancy woman, a woman chosen by God. You are just an ordinary person, you know? Although there are rules restricting me from killing people casually, I feel that if I only kill one person, it should be within the acceptable range. Also, even though I was outside just now, I know your situation inside the house, and nothing can be hidden from God's sight. Chen Daoming held wine and flowers in one hand, and directly lifted Subai's collar with the other hand to press Subai against the wall. He looked at Subai, and then, his face began to slowly change, gradually turning into a zombie face with a green face and fangs. He wanted to give Subai a nightmare, and give this ungrateful guy the most direct warning, even if it can't make him go crazy, but it's enough to make him have a nightmare-like fear about this place and this woman. But Chen Daoming was a little surprised to find that Subai, who was held up against the wall by him, did not have any frightened reaction because he revealed his zombie form. The other party still looked at him calmly. Just like. Look at a retard. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 878. At first, when this Chen Daoming said those words, Subai was stunned for a moment, and basically guessed his identity. After all, the audience circle is very differentiated, unless he thinks that this Chen Daoming it was a patient who had just escaped from the lunatic asylum, but it was obviously impossible. Immediately afterwards, when the other party reached out and held up his collar to lean against the wall, Subai was confused again. Yes, young Master Su was indeed confused, and he did not expect such a situation to occur. This guy originally joked with the fat man that he wanted to kill him when he was in the elevator, but he didn't have time to do it, but this guy actually ran out on his own, and even though he ran out, he actually dragged him like a god descending to earth. Do you want to punish yourself, immortal? When the zombie aura on the opponent's body came out and his whole face turned into a zombie, Subai's mood completely stabilized. It wasn't that he was scared before. In fact, as the guardian of the previous place of enlightenment, Mr. Su, what scene have you not seen before? Even the broadcast incident that most big shot listeners were kept in the dark about, he, young Master Su, basically witnessed the whole thing. The reason why Subai's mood fluctuated just now was that it was really hard for him to imagine that this guy could do this. He proclaimed that he was a god in front of himself, lifted himself to the wall, and then revealed his zombie-enhanced self in front of himself to scare himself. Subai really hadn't encountered such a fresh and refined clean flow in the audience circle for a long time. You must know that half a day ago he was intimidating a big-name audience and had an affair with another big-name audience. Chen Daoming was a little surprised. At first, he thought Subai was frightened by his own image, but soon he realized something was wrong. There was a sense of sarcasm in the other person's eyes and expression. Relax, really relax. When I pinched his collar and lifted it up, the other person seemed to be relaxed too. You should have a magic weapon on your body that can shield your breath, Subai said calmly. It is really amazing that this magic weapon can shield his own detection. You must know that Subai was completely blocked when the other party took action. His level of strength has been determined, but he is just an ordinary listener, not even a senior. If Chen Daoming didn't know the identity of the person in front of him after hearing this question, then he really could have killed him with a piece of tofu. Subconsciously, he held Subai's collar less tightly. Are you also a listener? There was some speculation in his words, but also a condescending tone. In the audience circle, one class is relative to the other, and they basically do not interfere with each other. At most, they only exist at the top of the next class. It is a rule of broadcasting to be able to make some contact and communicate with the upper class in advance. Subai clearly caught the fleeting panic deep in the eyes of Chen Daoming. The other party was pretending to be stupid. Of course, he hoped that Subai would be weaker than him even if he was an audience member, so that he could still teach Subai a lesson. But if Subai's strength is higher than him, it would be wrong to give in at this time. The smartest way is to pretend to be stupid. Simply compare yourself to a joke, a spittoon, and let yourself make the other person angry, so that the other person may not punish you for your offense. However, it is a pity that Subai is not the kind of person who understands emotions very well, and the fat man next to him has always been an expert at pretending to be stupid. The audience member in front of him who looks like Chen Daoming is obviously a better actor than me. Much worse than Fatty. Subai's figure began to move forward, and he also forcibly supported Chen Daoming to move forward. Facing the terrifying power coming from the other party's body, he had no room for resistance or delay. At this time, Subai's performance completely shattered all of Chen Daoming's illusions. He knew that he had really hit the wall this time. He really couldn't figure out why he was so unlucky. When he wanted to punish a guy who stole a woman from him in the real world, the guy turned out to be a senior. Yes, with Chen Daoming's level of thinking and his experience, he could only think that Subai, who clearly had abilities beyond his own, was a senior. He really didn't expect that Subai's level was higher than that of a senior. It's even higher, but the difference for Chen Daoming is actually not big. The principle is similar to destroying the earth once and destroying the earth dozens of times. Chen Daoming wanted to take back his hand, but he didn't know why his hand seemed to be stuck to the other person's clothes and he couldn't take it back at all. Subai walked forward step by step. Chen Daoming's face kept changing and he was forced back. Finally, Chen Daoming's back was pressed against the wall, but then, Chen Daoming felt a terrible force pressing on himself, and he actually lifted his body up. In a short period of time, the situation between the two parties seemed to have undergone completely different changes. The only difference was that Chen Daoming's hand continued to hold Subai's collar, but he had a bitter look on his face. From Subai's body, an evil spirit began to spread out, and it instantly penetrated into Chen Daoming's body. The strengthened zombie in Chen Daoming's body was stimulated by the evil spirit and manifested again. His face turned black and blue again, revealing there were two fangs, but his fangs were trembling, and there was no trace of bloodthirst or ferocity in his eyes, only panic. A playful smile appeared on the corner of Subai's mouth, and then he began to switch out of his zombie state. A sudden turn of events. Subai's zombie state has not changed significantly from his original appearance. This is because Subai has improved the zombie bloodline as much as possible while also integrating it with himself to the greatest extent. At present, Subai only had a layer of light cyan radiance lingering on his skin, but the negative auras of disaster, curse, and dirt emanating from his body were more than 100 times stronger than when Chen Daoming showed them before. The ancient zombie transformation was formed when Subai, relying on his identity as a guardian, forcibly dragged the remains of thousands of dead souls to be buried in the underworld. The rewards of such a large investment were naturally terrifying. Chen Daoming almost cried. He knew that he not only kicked the iron plate but also kicked the iron door of his boss. The person in front of him was also a zombie. And when the other party revealed his bloodline, there is a feeling of kneeling before the king. This is the crushing of the bloodline level. The bloodline gap between the two sides is really too big, so big that the latter can hardly raise any emotion of resistance. Any life is actually divided into 3, 6, or 9 classes. Even in modern society, human classes still exist, but they have been blurred to the greatest extent in the development of human history. As for monsters and zombies, 4 other creatures that rely purely on strength and respect the law of the jungle, the level of blood is a fear imprinted in the bones and a memory in the blood inheritance. Even if the blood is strengthened by humans, it is still difficult to change the blood impulse and essence, unless the human being is strong enough. But unfortunately, Chendeaming is not in this strong enough order. My lord, my lord. Chendeaming began to beg for mercy. He did not yell "spare my life" or "I was wrong," because he knew that shouting such words at this time would only increase the psychological pleasure of the other party's abuse of him. If he wanted to take this opportunity to kill himself, he would not change his decision just because of his plea for mercy. Abusing a guy like this doesn't actually bring much pleasure to Subai. It's not even as good as the pleasure Subai had after taking a few tricks under Luda. But there is one thing that makes Subai a little curious until now. That is, even in this state, when he and Chendeaming are so close, they still haven't discovered the magic weapon that can hide the breath in the other party's body. "Where is your magic weapon?" Subai asked. It didn't matter whether he killed the person in front of him or not, but that magic weapon was something Subai was interested in. It was an ordinary thing. If the audience holds a magic weapon that can block the perception of advanced audiences, if it is in their own hands, can it have a greater effect? A flash of determination flashed in the eyes of Chendeaming. He knew that he had to pay a certain price if he wanted to save his life this time. The next moment, the skin on his chest began to break, and a crystal bone the size of a thumb was forced out of his body. Subai stretched out his hand to pull out the bone and held it in his hand. Then his whole body lost its previous aura and returned to normal. Chendeaming fell to the ground and shouted respectfully to Subai, "Thank you for not killing me." Then he immediately turned around and ran towards the stairs, his eyes full of resentment. However, when he ran down the stairs like a sprint, he met a fat man walking up. "Get away!" Chendeaming stretched out his hand to push the fat man, and black nails were even visible on the palms of his hands. He was now filled with anger and resentment, and even wanted to vent his anger by killing someone who stood in the way. The fat man was directly knocked away, and Chendeaming continued to run down. In an instant, his head, arms, feet, and limbs were all separated. Before he died, he didn't even know how he died. He was even wondering why the adult wanted to kill him after giving him hope of life. At the elevator entrance, Subai was still playing with the bone, and the fat man walked up from the stairs next to him leisurely. "Sorry to trouble you," Subai said. "You just have a big heart." "Fatty, my way of doing things is to get rid of the weeds and get rid of the roots. Even if this guy is weak now, who knows what will happen in the future? Why, do you see a shadow of yourself in him?" Fatty and Subai walked into the elevator together. After pressing the floor button, Fatty suddenly said, "There was someone who didn't take me seriously at first, took my things and let me go. Then, that person was killed by me in the story world. Dabai, you and I both know that you are not the real prince, so our mentality must be adjusted. Okay, I know you sensed the energy fluctuation, and I deliberately left you with something to do." Subai threw the skeleton to the fat man. "Look at this, it doesn't look like a magic weapon." The fat man took the skeleton, but continued, "What if I am too lazy to take action? If this guy really runs away, it will be almost impossible for you to kill him with today's karma. You will forget him, but he will always remember you, and he will find time and opportunity." Subai felt that it was time to stop Fatty's sudden interest in preaching, and said directly, "Black person." "What?" The fat man was stunned for a moment, not realizing it. "Crematorium," Subai said again. The fat man's face immediately turned red and turned the color of pig liver, and he shouted at Subai, "Can we still be good friends?" Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 879. The monk and the others opened a suite. There was a small room separated from the big room, with 2 beds, and a machine table inside. When Subai and the fat man came in, the monk was making tea. God knows if he brought the tea with him. Buddha was standing by the window and looking at the busy traffic below in trance. The fat man lay down directly on the bed and yawned. Subai walked to the Buddha and asked, "What are you thinking about?" "Think without delusions," the monk who was making tea answered the question at this time. In fact, monks are most sensitive to changes in the state of mind. The monk and the Buddha have always had a good relationship since they met. At this time, the Buddha obviously had some changes in his state of mind. The monk can naturally feel the changes, and it seems that the two of them are already familiar with each other to the point of understanding each other. "It's exactly what Kilo said." Buddha smiled and leaned his back against the window. When Subai handed over a cigarette, he shook his head and said, "I quit." When Buddha was preparing to become a high-level listener, he basically took up eating, drinking, prostitution and gambling. Not to mention cigarettes, he probably tasted a round of the latest drugs and drugs. But at his current state, some foreign objects, say, it is normal to just quit. For example, Subai still has the habit of smoking, but nicotine has no effect on him at all, and he is not even psychologically dependent. He is just deliberately maintaining the same living habits as before, otherwise he will really become an immortal, all day long. Living a life that is not part of the world is a bit boring. When I first became a listener, I felt very excited because I thought I could rely on this place and this identity to raise my cultivation level to a level that living Buddhas of all generations can look up to. Now, I can say that I have succeeded. There are certainly no living Buddhas in the past who have cultivated as high as me. But it seems that because my strength is getting higher and higher, and I come into contact with more and more things, I suddenly find that I seem to have jumped into a circle, and this circle is infinitely long and infinitely large. I can't walk at all. Go out. Broadcasting, even if something goes wrong or something unexpected happens, it is still broadcasting. It is not as simple as a computer program. From experiencers to low-level listeners to ordinary listeners to senior listeners, and finally becoming high-level listeners, it seems that a lot has changed, but in fact our situation has not changed at all. If we one day become enlightened, we will still be able to achieve enlightenment. You have to take a train ticket to go to that place. Listening to Buddha's narration, Subai understood that in fact, not only Buddha, but also Subai himself, and even the audience at this level would have this kind of mental state. The biggest fear is not that the journey is dangerous, but that there is no end. Subai stretched out his hand to shake off the ashes, raised his head, and looked at the ceiling. "Lord Buddha, you shouldn't be so pretentious." "I'm not being pretentious, but I suddenly feel a little tired." Buddha said naturally, "We can regard our own death as the end of this journey, but this goal is too petty. Taking this as the end-point target, and you will feel unwilling to do so." Subai nodded, "Yes, we have come to this point. Who is willing to die?" In ancient times, so many emperors sought immortality and medicine, and there was even Emperor Jiajing who wore Taoist robes to make elixirs. Did they really want to practice Taoism and become immortals? They just want to live a little longer and extend their years as emperors. If you really want them to become immortals, I guess they themselves are not willing to do so. In their opinion, being an emperor in the world is definitely better than being a lowly immortal in heaven. Much, much better. The throne is already so infatuating, but now this audience has a greater pleasure than the secular imperial power can bring. God. That Chandayaming said he was a god, which is enough to reflect the mentality of the entire audience class. Especially when you reach the stage of advanced listeners, this mentality is really difficult to change. Thinking about things that cannot be solved is also said to be a waste of time. The monk made tea and used the tap water in the room. The water was boiled very quickly and the water was filled with paper cups, but the aroma of tea is still fragrant. Perhaps with the monk's state of mind, the tea ceremony has really come to the level for him. It's funny, Buddha sat down by the other bed. He was not decadent, but he just felt something. In fact, among the four people, Subai himself was the one whose mood was most likely to change and fluctuate. The other three, those who practice Buddhism and Taoism, have a very stable mind. The door was pushed open, and Chen Ryu came in. She must have just taken a shower, and her hair was still a little wet. Latest news, the train will leave tomorrow. Hearing this news, Fatty and others showed a look of relief on their faces. After tomorrow, there will be no more of those guys above them. Oh, no, there is another Liang Sen, but Boss Liang has no sense of existence anyway. One more of him is not much. Subai thought of another point, and that was Lichi. Hai Mei was dead, and he couldn't get any news about the little guy from him. Now Lichi should be the only one who knows about the little guy's condition. Not surprisingly, Lichi will also appear at the train station tomorrow. Subai actually didn't hesitate too much about whether he should go or not. The reason why he chose to stay in this building and rely on formations to avoid detection was because he didn't want to get into other troubles. He didn't want to go to the overestimated gang. The moral integrity of the listeners, once they know that Liang Sen didn't get the ticket, they will definitely take action against them. Not everyone is like Liang Sen or Luda. The idea of princes, generals, and Xiangning is the mainstream thinking of the big guys. It is impossible for me to pull the skin of a tiger and kill the big guys who are about to get on the train. They were shocked and knelt down one by one to lick their own leather boots. Wait until the train leaves the station tomorrow and go there by yourself. By then, those big guys probably won't have time to do anything to you. In fact, to put it bluntly, no matter how dangerous it is, Subai must go. Your son has been stolen. If you, a father, are still afraid of danger and dare not go to the person who stole your son, then what a failure this dad must be. I'll go to the train station tomorrow, Subai said. Don't go. I believe I should be fine. It might be a little safer if he goes alone, Chen Ryu said at this time. The fat man, Buddha, and the monk all nodded. This time the three of them did not say that they must go together for the sake of loyalty or godfather status, because they knew that if something happened at the train station tomorrow, they would definitely not add a few high-level listeners. It can be solved. By the way, help me look at this. Subai threw the bone to Chen Ryu. Is it a magic weapon? Chen Ryu took the specifications, with a look of surprise on her face, and said directly, a skeleton of a big shot audience, and he should have specialized in formations during his lifetime. Holy shit, are you so awesome? The fat man had also seen the skeleton, but he didn't see so much information at all. I know the owner of the skeleton. Chen Ryu openly admitted that she had cheated. This person should be the last person who left by train. He passed this skeleton to someone, but that person, the guy, was a bit unlucky and died in a story world, but I didn't expect that the skeleton was left back in the real world. Let's use the waste from the radio. Subai finally figured it out at this time. According to the radio's character, if you hold back your urine or feces on the road, you have to go home and excrete it in your own toilet so that it can be convenient for watering the fields. Since it is the listener's thing, lost in the story world, it should also find an opportunity to let this thing flow back into the hands of the audience. That Chen Daoming must have been lucky. As an ordinary listener, he could actually get the inheritance made by a big shot with his own bones. This luck was really a bit buggy, but it was a pity that this thing ended up in his own hands. Subai even thought that if Chen Daoming didn't have this thing, he could directly feel the aura of the audience on the other person's body. It was estimated that he could scare him away by just leaking some of his own energy in the cafe and not dare to pester Ying again. There would be no such thing as this guy banging himself against the wall and scaring himself with his zombie face. Time is also destiny. I didn't realize that guy was the audience at the time. Chen Ryu said, I can help you sort this out tonight. The big guy arranged all his bones and blood into a formation, which is considered a very domineering, it's also a very exaggerated way. I'll give it to you tomorrow morning. I think if you integrate this into your bones, as long as you don't use the ability of the audience or the big boss is specifically interested in you to study you deeply, it should not be ignored. Discover. The relationship is good. Subai is not afraid that Chen Ryu will embezzle this thing. If this skeleton can really avoid the detection of the big guys, then he only needs to go to the train station to find Lizzie alone, which can save a lot of trouble. In the evening, everyone ordered takeout and ate some casually. Chen Ryu had a room by herself, while Subai and 4 others shared a large suite. The fat man was lying on the bed watching TV, and Buddha was taking a shower. At this time, the monk took the initiative to walk to Subai and said, "That woman seems to easily irritate the audience." "I feel it too," Subai nodded. "She must have been entangled with the audience a lot in the past, and she is slowly getting sucked into this vortex. If you don't want her to become an audience, you should let her change her environment. In fact, you were right to abandon the inheritance left by your parents. Isn't this woman's studio a detective agency rented with your assets?" The monk's words shocked Subai, and then he smiled bitterly and said, "I really didn't expect this. No wonder, it turned out that I caused her to have a cause and effect with me." The poor monk pointed it out, just because he was afraid that you would have regrets. "Thank you, monk. She is going to the United States for further study soon. She won't live in my place anymore." Subai shook his head. "They are just a bunch of humming bumbling stars who only try to defeat the people around them." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 880. Subai slept for a longer time this time. Maybe it was because he hadn't really slept in bed for a long time. The hotel bed was definitely not as comfortable as the bed at home, but it was still much more comfortable than the cold coffin in the place of enlightenment. In addition, after what happened yesterday, it would be no exaggeration to say that he was exhausted. When Subai woke up, it was already approaching dusk outside. The train is at night, and it's just time to wake up now. Although I know you can't oversleep, I'm still a little worried. The monk stood beside the bed and looked at Subai. Even normal people can actually develop an instinct not to oversleep the next day if they have something on their mind. What's more, not to mention people like the audience who deal with life and death all the time. The only thing the monk is worried about is whether he should wake him up if Subai really oversleeps, because the probability of Subai oversleeping in a pure sense is too low, and it is difficult to wake up someone who is pretending to sleep. It really woke me up, but all that was left was embarrassment. Subai got out of bed and took a shower first. The fat man and Buddha went to other floors to eat. The monk stayed in the room and waited for Subai to take a shower before they went out together. There was a private restaurant on the 5th floor, but no matter, it was judging from the size of the diners and the size of the service staff, it seems that they have nothing to do with private restaurants in the traditional sense. Chen Ryu and Fatty were sitting and eating together. When Subai sat over, Chen Ryu took the initiative to hand the bone to Subai. The bone seemed to have been illuminated by Chen Ryu, the formation master. They were round and delicate in the hand, and were no different from the fine Lanshan jade. "There should be no problem, but you still have to be careful," Chen Ryu reminded Subai. "Also, if you see Liji, you can try to talk to her about other things." "Let's talk about life and ideals," Subai asked back. "Lichi was a thief who stole his son, or more accurately, a human trafficker." Subai was already in a violent state when facing Haimai, not to mention facing Haimai. When facing the real murderer. "I'm just giving you a suggestion." Chen Ryu was eating a shrimp, her voice was not very clear. "This matter is not simple. The problem of broadcasting and your parents, we really can't just look at the surface. I am a personal participant." Subai reminded that this matter, even if it is in the fog for most of the big guys, can't be seen clearly, but Subai is indeed a real person due to his own special reasons. "Of participants. You don't have to be so excited. Chen Ryu took a sip of red wine. Actually, you know some things in your heart, and none of us here will put any pressure or opinions on you because of the choices you make. In the real world, we are a separate group. In this group, there are only a few people who know about this matter, so you can really be more casual. The meaning of Chen Ryu's words is very simple, that is, since Li Ji did not take the initiative to send the child back, then if you take the initiative to find her this time, you will probably return in vain. But under the premise of returning in vain, what can you do? Manage. Could it be that they beat up Li Ji in the train station? No matter how you look at it, it seems to be a very difficult choice. But, just follow your heart. The monk relaxed the atmosphere at this time. He is the one who knows Sudbai's exact character. Perhaps in other places, Sudbai can try to suppress his temper and choose to be treated tactfully, but there are some things that belong to Sudbai's reverse scale. At this time, the fat man handed Sudbai a plastic bag, which contained a human skin and a new ID card. It must be said that the fat man did think more comprehensively in many cases. You guys keep eating, I'm going to the train station first. Sudbai ate something casually and then stood up and picked up the bag to leave. The bone was held in his hand and slowly blended into his palm. In an instant, no one here could sense Sudbai's existence. If he was not in their eyes, they would not know that he was approaching. This thing is really good. The fat man grinned and said, it's like a magical tool for pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger. Sister Chen, can you give me one as well? After you prove your enlightenment, the fat man started to act like a pig again. Dikao Huawa. The skeleton of a boss-level audience can only be counted as one of them. Another point is that this boss must be majoring in formation strengthening, and he must have worked hard to carve his own body into a humanoid self-propelled formation. If I remember correctly, you are also an array master. Chen Ryu looked at the fat man coldly. After you prove enlightenment, I can find a way to lock you up and use your bone carving array to refine magic weapons. Everyone else here has a share in seeing it. The fat man continued to immerse himself in the food in front of him in an attitude of not hitting women. Sudbai waved to everyone at the table and walked to the elevator alone. Buddha and the monk looked at each other, both of them had a little helplessness in their eyes. This time Sudbai went to the train station. It could be said to be extremely dangerous, or it could be said to be not dangerous, so the two of them didn't know what to do. What kind of attitude should I take to say goodbye to him? However, some things are so troubled that they really need an explanation. No matter what, Buddha and the monk will indeed pay attention to this matter, because the child was stolen under their noses. Sudbai got off the elevator and called a taxi directly at the door to go to the East Railway Station. Half an hour later, Sudbai got off the car in the underground parking lot of the East Railway Station. As soon as he entered the station, Sudbai felt several strong pressures. Some big-shot listeners will subconsciously suppress their pressure and dress themselves up like ordinary people. Even the sanitation worker pushing the trash can may be a big shot. This is the life interest of the listeners. The same as Qin Yang driving a taxi in Qinhuangdao to make money to support his family. But there are also some people who are used to going their own way. Moreover, they are about to take the train to that place, and there are also some children who are about to graduate. They also take the school rules and disciplines lightly. Fortunately, this kind of coercion will be felt more clearly to the audience, as if a big stone is pressing on them, but for ordinary people, it means that the weather is too stuffy and humid, making breathing a little difficult. At this moment, maybe this is the gathering point of the most powerful force in the entire East, Sudbai thought in his heart, then bought a ticket and went through the security check. Because the audience ability cannot be used here, so things that were once simple can now seem a little more cumbersome. Entering the waiting hall, there was a huge crowd here, the seats were full, and many people were sitting on the floor. The reason was that there were some problems due to heavy rain along the way, which caused several trains to be delayed, so there were many stranded passengers. Subai took the elevator up to the second floor. There were McDonald's, KFC, and some other fast food restaurants here. Subai felt that if he was a big boss waiting for the train, it would be most appropriate to wait here, and those few who didn't control their breath expressions. The boss was obviously also on the second floor, and Subai didn't let himself look at those exact locations. These people are all human beings. Although they are shielded by the aura of bones at this time, as long as they show some tricks, they will probably find out the clues. Subai walked into a Western-style fast food restaurant, ordered a simple meal, and sat down. It was just 7 o'clock at this time, and the train might not leave until around 9 o'clock, so there is still time, but if you don't use your listening ability to find lychee among so many people, you really have to rely on luck, but like that, women should be more conspicuous no matter where they are placed. At this moment, Subai's cell phone rang. He took it out and found that it was a message. "Where are you?" Subai put down his phone and immediately saw Ji Zhen standing at the escalator on the second floor. He was actually here. Immediately, Subai thought of another person. Sure enough, in front of Xie Zhen, Subai saw Senator Liang Sen was actually standing with Luda. There were two other people, a man and a woman, beside him. The four of them were talking and talking. Smiling, "It looks like we have a good relationship. Why are the two of them here?" Subai subconsciously touched the disguised human skin on his face. He knew that he should not be discovered, but this feeling made him uncomfortable. Didn't Liang Sen not get the train ticket? Why did he come too? Is it just to say goodbye? Naturally, Xie Zhen, who was standing at the entrance of the escalator, could not find Subai. He continued to send messages to Subai. "My boss said he wants to see you and say hello. He knows where lychee is." Subai hesitated for a moment, then stood up and walked towards Ji Zhen. He leaned against the railing beside Ji Zhen and continued to play with his mobile phone. Xie Zhen looked at the person next to him with some surprise. For some reason, he felt something was wrong, but there was nothing strange about this person. "It's me," Subai replied with these two words. Ji Zhen smiled, and then shouted to Liang Sen, who was still chatting over there. "Boss, there's something wrong with the company." Hearing this, Liang Sen turned around and said with some waning interest, "My game company." Judging from the context, it was filled with a sense of helplessness and regret that he was about to leave his career in the real world. Immediately, Liang Sen smiled apologetically at the people around him, then turned around and walked to Ching Cheng. The theme of the company's next game. Xie Zhen and Liang Sen continued to chat about the company. Soon, the two of them finished chatting. Liang Sen lit a cigarette, as if he didn't want the nearby managers to come. Expulsion warned himself not to smoke, so he set up an isolation formation so that people outside could not see his behavior. "They didn't know I didn't receive the ticket, and Luda didn't tell me." Subai, who was playing with his cell phone on one side, didn't react at all. "The lychee man is over at the convenience store on the first floor. You go find her." After saying that, Liang Sen patted Xie Zhen on the shoulder with some feeling, as if to tell Xie Zhen to do a good job, and also to talk to his assistant. "Farewell." At this time, Xie Zhen sent another message to Subai. "You are afraid, but he is even more afraid. He is not afraid of scarcity but of inequality." Subai didn't reply and went straight down the escalator to the bottom. As he walked towards the convenience store, his heart suddenly became heavier and heavier. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 881. When Subai walked to the door of the convenience store, he saw several passengers buying water, including two salesmen, but Subai did not notice the presence of lychees. In fact, there is basically no situation that Liang Sen misunderstood or deliberately teased him. Liang Sen cannot be that boring. Moreover, as a big shot audience, Liang Sen can freely explore the surrounding situation at this time. If you can't determine the location of Lichi like this, it would be really weird. Subai stood behind a shelf and waited slowly. He believed that if Lichi was here, he would notice him, even if he was disguised and had a magic weapon that could shield his breath. This is an indescribable feeling. Subai still remembers the scene in his memory of Lichi sitting next to his bed and taking care of him when he was young. Although the two of them have basically become strangers when they grow up, they even have a vague understanding of each other. The antagonistic relationship has been established, but Subai believes in that woman's strength, and she is not that easy to fool. However, what Subai is worried about now is that if this woman finds out but pretends that she has not seen him, then things will be a little difficult to handle. However, what he worried about did not happen. A chuckle sounded next to Subai. In an instant, the layout of the entire convenience store changed dramatically. The surrounding scene instantly transformed into a courtyard. A stone table and several stone benches, surrounded by quiet and fragrant orchids and tranquility. This scene was very familiar to Subai. It was actually the environment of his old yard in Chengdu. In his memory when he was young, Su Yuhang liked to draw and write on the stone table, while Lu Menjiao liked to sit on the stone stool next to him and read company documents. Of course, this is the memory Subai saw from the scroll, and it should be false, because at this point, Subai has already discovered that the man and the woman are not husband and wife at all, and he wants them to be so compatible. It is obviously impossible to raise eyebrows together. At this time, Subai was standing next to the stone table. On another chair, a woman was sitting. The woman was eating a bunch of fruit in her hand, which was lychees. You know, I rarely eat lychees since I was sensible. Lychee put a piece of crystal lychee meat into his mouth and chewed it, looking at Subai with a smile. Where's my child? Subai didn't mean too much to get close. The purpose of his coming here was very simple, and that was for the little guy. He is with me, but I didn't take him with me. He is useful to me. Li Ji's language is very straightforward. Neither of them is the kind of person who likes to talk in circles, so once two people like this become opposites, even if they are chatting, there is always a smell of gunpowder that might draw a sword at any time. After saying that, Lychee dropped the fruit shell in his hand on the ground. Are you feeling aggrieved? Your son was taken away by me, but you couldn't do anything to me because the difference in strength is too big, and you know it too. Even if you insist on taking action, the final result will be self-humiliation. Give me my son back. Subai repeated the sentence. If someone who is familiar with Subai is standing next to him at this time, he should be able to understand that this is a sign that Subai is about to go berserk. It's a pity that there is no live broadcast here. Fat Monk and the others can't see the progress of the matter, but if they saw that Subai had spent a lot of effort to hide his identity and enter here to find Li Ji, and immediately became tense before saying a few words, they would probably also I can't laugh or cry. But the outcome of the matter is bound to develop in this direction. Subai wants to marry his son, but Lychee is unwilling to hand it over. Subai is unwilling to avoid this deadlock, and Lychee cannot give in. Chen Ryu had said before that they would not put pressure on Subai no matter what choice he made. This is what he meant. For Chen Ryu, a bystander, if Subai did not return his son, then getting some appropriate compensation from Li Ji or getting some valuable information to share with everyone would be considered a gain. You should also know some things. In fact, you and I are essentially the same. We were both experimental subjects under the hands of those two people. We are. I don't want to listen to your nonsense. The pupil of Subai's left eye began to condense into a red color, and the pupil of his right eye began to condense into an ancient ink color. It was obvious that he was stimulating the two major bloodlines in his body. It's a pity. I thought we could actually sit down and have a good chat. After all, in this world, you seem to be the only one who has something in common with me. Lichi's figure appeared in front of Subai in an instant, and a hand was placed on Subai's forehead. Buzz. Subai only felt that the energy and blood in his body were instantly frozen, and the two bloodlines he had just drawn also fell silent at this time. You know, in front of the Lintung Terracotta Warriors and Horses History Museum, Lichi once overpowered Lu Menjiu. This woman's strength was somewhat similar to that of Chen Ryu, and she had almost no rivals at the same level. It's not much fun to chat like this. Lizzie seemed a little helpless, as if a tea party she was planning to hold had an unexpected incident and the atmosphere was lost. Subai's body and soul, including his bloodline, were suppressed at this time. This is different from a seal, which is bullying you unilaterally by relying on its own absolute superior power. 2000 years ago, you should also know about the radio showdown between Alexander and the first emperor, right? Lichi said to herself. Both emperors fell in the end, but Alexander the Great was the first to fall, not because he was the weakest, nor because the legions under his command were too weak, but because he saw one thing clearly, that is, even if at that time, the power of the world could not really resist successful broadcasting. So Alexander the Great chose another path. At the expense of himself, he gained an opportunity to communicate directly with the consciousness of the broadcast. Subai did not respond to Lichi, but when Lichi said this, he suddenly thought of the last words of the last skeleton in the previous story world. Alexander the Great sacrificed his own life for a result, that is, he taught broadcasting consciousness one thing. Play. Lichi reached out and picked off a few mint leaves, took out the teapot from nowhere, and started making tea. It is also because of this that we have the awareness of broadcasting, the fun and aesthetics of broadcasting, and the confusing world of this story that is essentially about cultivating goo. Subai didn't know what Lizzie was going to say. She had snatched away her son and now she was trapped here. What was the point of telling her this? When you play for a long time, you will feel bored, especially when you know that your future will be completely the same. This kind of despair will make you miserable. Perhaps this was the true purpose of Alexander the Great. In this way, he completed his revenge, the revenge of a great emperor. Lizzie continued to narrate, actually, at first, I didn't think about your parents' affairs and Alexander's affairs together, but when I was facing off against your mother, I was pulled into the world of the story. I really realized that the broadcaster actually stood with them. It's like the man sitting on the throne and the rebels have actually joined forces. That's really ironic, right? Lichi continued talking, but her mood became calmer and calmer. From that moment on, I realized that my plan, my copying, and all my preparations were in vain, because the path of those two people was a path that could not be copied. Putting aside hatred, I once lamented that they must be very lonely, because they walked too far on that road, with no one in front of them and no one behind them. It is indeed beautiful and gorgeous to walk alone like this. One thing. But the truth is so unbearable. Yes, I should have thought of it a long time ago. How can we do a noble cause with ugly methods? They have long been in contact with the broadcasting consciousness. Half of that road was taken by them. The other half was paved for them by radio. Therefore, I will definitely not be able to go down this road. Then why do you want to keep my son? Subai said at this time. Lichi suddenly smiled, smiling very happily. She lowered her head and brought her face very close to Subai, so close that both parties could see each other's eyelashes clearly. But, I suddenly thought of another thing. Lu, do you know that the consciousness of broadcasting has chosen self-annihilation? It is actually not dead yet. Your parents are far from reaching the upper level. The broadcast consciousness chooses to end itself, but it still has to deal with and end the affairs of this world. If your parents want to wake up and become a new broadcast consciousness, they must wait for the end of this world and the beginning of the next world. What's the meaning? The meaning is very simple. I can tell you now where the end of the train is. It was a place similar to the world 2000 years ago. More than 2000 years ago, a group of demon gods descended from the darkness. As natives, Alexander the Great and the first emperor naturally had to fight for their own world. But they failed. You can imagine that the batches of demon gods that came to this world more than 2000 years ago were actually listeners in another world who were cultivated by broadcasting in this way. The power that mankind and the two empires had back then is really unimaginable, but you can also tell from the physical bodies of Qin soldiers that you have come into contact with. The first emperor once had a Qin soldiers with a strength of 100,000 high-level listeners, but he still failed. The reason is very simple. The enemies he faces are groups of big boss-level listeners who come by train. Only boss-level listeners are qualified to be trained to join this war of aggression. Now, I am doing the same thing on the other side of the train. The resistance of that world, with the departure of this train bringing a group of big guys, should have come to an end. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 882. Sudbai is now like a scarecrow, standing here with lychees. This is really ridiculous, that is, the culprit who stole his son is clearly in front of him, but he can't do anything about it. In fact, many people have already guessed this powerlessness before. After all, the strength gap between the two sides is here, so clear and engraved. This gap cannot be made up by luck or the explosion of a small universe. But there was one thing that Sudbai didn't understand. Why did this woman say this to herself? Everything a person does has a purpose, even the kind of aimless wandering around actually has the purpose of aimless relaxation. But now from Sudbai's perspective, it is indeed difficult to understand Lychee's current behavior. Actually, there is one thing I know very well, that is, I have lost. Lizzie's tone was still very calm, even when admitting that he had lost, but I still have one last chance, and that is, when this world ends and that world begins, I have one last chance. At this time, the sound of a train suddenly came from outside. This sound could not be heard by ordinary people, but to the audience, it was like a rally call. I'm leaving. It's a pity that our communication can only end in this unideal way. In fact, both the context and atmosphere of the communication are completely different from what was originally imagined. Maybe it's because of you I haven't clearly understood one thing yet. Everything has its parts and imperfections, and what begins must have an end. Lychee turned around and was about to leave, but before leaving, she paused and continued. Liang Sen didn't receive the train ticket. I actually guessed this. He and I were listeners at the same time. I know his character and temperament very well, even if he pretends to be very good. Luda didn't tell me the truth of the matter. He thought he could hide it from me, so he was in two different situations. Everyone, every living person, has his or her own agenda. Everyone wants to maximize their own interests, but at this time, it seems very meaningless. Sudbai, I will fight for the radio to open another batch of trains. What you have to do now is to try your best to achieve enlightenment before the next train arrives. Otherwise, if you can't even catch the last train, wait, yours will be the final demise. My son. Sudbai now felt like Xionglin's wife, who could only repeat one thing over and over again, no matter what Lychee was telling her, no matter what the deep meaning conveyed in Lychee's words. Meaning, for Sudbai, he clearly knew what he needed most now. He. The scene was slowly fading, and as the whistle blew, the big guys in the train station had to get on the train one by one and go to the place they didn't want to go at all. A card appeared in Lychee's palm, she threw it away, and then her figure disappeared at this moment. Buzz. The scene was completely shattered. Sudbai found that he was still standing behind the shelves of the convenience store, but his clothes had been completely wet with sweat. Everything around him seemed to have not changed at all from before he came in. Then, Sudbai looked at the card at his feet. In fact, for Sudbai, his purpose of coming here to ask for the little one from Li Ji is really not big, because he knows that the possibility of his success is very low, so after spending so much effort, he can't come here. Maybe he just wanted to express his firm position as a father. Subai wanted to make sure that Li Ji did not take the little guy on the train with him. As long as the little guy was not brought on the train by Li Ji, he could directly check the little guy's location through the reward given by the broadcast and wait for the train to leave. After that, broadcasting should be completely back to normal. The collision of the old train and the rails continued to fade away. Subai supported the shelf with one hand and slowly walked to the door. This attracted the attention of the salesperson, who was afraid that Subai was a thief who came to steal things. Has the purpose been achieved? Boss Liang appeared next to Subai at the most appropriate time. I knew I wouldn't get anything out of the question. Subai could see that Boss Liang was in a good mood, and even seemed to be beaming with joy. As a big shot listener and a very cowardly guy, he was actually the best at it. Hide your emotions. But today seems to be an exception, but it is understandable. Seeing a group of guys of the same level getting on the train one by one with mournful faces, Boss Liang, who was pretending to have the same expression as them, was still standing on the road when the train started. On the stage, the corners of his mouth slowly formed an arc. Looking at the shocked expressions of his colleagues in the car window, he laughed wildly. This picture is very easy to imagine. And the fact is indeed similar to Subai's imagination. When Boss Liang walked back from the platform boarding area to here, he had actually restrained his emotions subconsciously, but even if he restrained, he still smiled. Subai did not answer Boss Liang, but turned over his hand and took out the card. It was the business card of an orphanage, and its address was over Josegu Valley in Aba. Without any delay, Subai took out his phone and took a photo of the business card, then sent the photo to Fatty. He should know what to do. There leaving, Xie held 3 glasses of orange juice in his hand, handed one to his boss, and then another to Subai. Subai took the orange juice and took a sip. How do you feel? Xie looked at Subai and asked. I feel like the sky has become a lot more relaxed. Liang Sen's figure slowly dissipated after taking the orange juice. The train departs from here and will pass through the west. Big bosses from the west will also get on the train. As the only remaining big boss in the world, Liang Sen, while feeling lucky, I also felt a kind of fear, which began to become clearer after the ecstatic state of watching them get into the car ended. I don't feel anything, Subai replied, waiting for the fat man over there to find a reply for him. Xie then realized that Subai was still distracted by his son's affairs, so he didn't ask him to enjoy the pleasure of finally standing at the top of the pyramid with him. Soon, Fatty called, and Subai answered the phone. Dabai, the fat man's voice was loud and a little excited. Yes, I can hear it, Subai responded. I checked the photo you just sent me. That orphanage was opened 4 years ago, but closed a year ago. However, the land of the orphanage is their own, so after the orphanage closed, that place is still preserved, located in Aba, on the other side of Josegu Valley. Do you have any photos? The card only had the name and address of the orphanage, no picture. Yes, I found it online and sent it to you. Please check your phone. Subai exited the call interface, opened WeChat, and saw the photo of the orphanage found online that Fatty had just sent to him. Suddenly, Subai's brows furrowed together. This orphanage was something he remembered. The orphanage built by Zhong's cheap parents is exactly the same, but the original one was in CD and the current one is in Aba. The voice did not hang up. After looking at the photo, Subai said directly. This orphanage looks the same as the one my parents built before. This is the address of the orphanage recorded on the card that Li Ji left for me before she left. Fatty, do you think she suddenly became kind before she left? I don't think so, but I have to go to that place. I'll book a flight for you and I'll go with you. Yes, Subai did not refuse Fatty's kindness and hung up the phone first. In fact, Subai already knew the answer to the question that Subai just asked Fatty. Lychee was not a good man or woman. From what happened to Haimime it can be clearly seen from the above, so Subai doesn't think that the other party will finally do a favor and return the little guy to her. She probably didn't have time to finish everything she said or didn't need to finish everything, but it seems that, then the orphanage, which closed a year ago, may provide some answers. Subai had a vague hunch that the little guy was probably there too. The orphanage is located on the mountainside. It is an excellent location from the perspective of feng shui and lighting and scenery. Below is the lush mountain forest, not far from a nearby small town, although there are some it means isolated from the world, but generally speaking, it harmoniously links seclusion and the world. However, the orphanage has been abandoned for a year, and the children who were here in the past few years have also been sent away. Except for an uncle who is a janitor, no staff in the orphanage are still here. Tonight, as usual, the uncle turned on the radio and listened to the broadcast while reading the newspaper in his hand. But as he looked, a black mist suddenly appeared and enveloped the uncle. The uncle soon passed out on the table. At the same time, in a children's dormitory that had long been vacant, a cradle slowly emerged, shaking slowly. The bells on the cradle made a crisp sound due to the shaking, like the most beautiful and quiet lullaby in the world, soothing the little guy's heart one after another, allowing him to fall asleep all the time. Long himself is in Sichuan. When he wrote this chapter, he felt his chair shaking. At first he didn't realize it was an earthquake, but then he realized it was an earthquake. He hoped that the people in the earthquake area were safe.